This is part one, and part one is looking at how to interact with the argument against how is there a God if he's allowing so much bad stuff to happen, or I can't believe in a God with all the junk in the world. And what I was saying before I got so rudely interrupted by my own app features was that when this question is given to you, the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to listen to the objections or the criticism of Christianity. If you're in a conversation with somebody, and this is one of the biggest arguments against religion in general, but Christianity in particular, I can't believe in a God if he's, with all the junk that's going on in this world, everything that's terrible with this world, I can't believe in a God that would allow all this to happen. The first thing you want to do is listen, and ask questions, like caring questions, not questions to try to drive a point, not questions to try to get at them, but just questions to understand where they're coming from. So that's number one, is just listen, because, and we'll come back to this at the end, many times their arguments are something that you actually agree with. Like as you ask questions about this interaction with God and evil and the presence of suffering, a lot of times the objections and the things that they wrestle with and have a hard time with are things that you would agree with or at least empathize with. And so seek to empathize, seek to listen, seek to understand before you go into these type of arguments. So number one, John, can you see my comments? Yes, I can see your comments. Okay. So, John, if you got a question or if anybody has a question that comes up during this time, I'm going to try to pay attention. My Facebook is kind of freaking out a little bit, so we'll see what happens. So, ask questions, listen, try to understand where they're coming from. It's usually can be a deeply personal question, and so you want to enter into the conversation deeply. So, I can't believe there's a God with all the junk in the world. Number one, especially in this time, we just have to say, and this isn't helpful to an argument for the God of Christianity or God at all, but we just need to understand and that historically, if it's where we're at right now, the world has been really ravaged with terrible things throughout history. And so if somebody is coming from something deeply personal that happened to them, deeply personal, that's why we want to ask those questions and understand if they've lost a child, a loved one, if something terrible's happened to them. We want to start talking to them more personally than theoretically. If it moves into the theoretical, okay, all the bad things that this leader did, or all the bad things that are happening right now in the world with the coronavirus, all that stuff. We just need to settle in and that's not new. Like bad stuff has been happening for a while, so this isn't a new argument. Again, this doesn't help the case. It's just stepping us back from what can be feels like right here and right now, and the issues here, and say, the arguments that you have, especially in the theoretical range, the arguments that you have, they're not brand new. It's not something like, oh yeah, now it's so bad that we have to address this. That actually philosophers and theologians have been dealing with this question for quite some time. So then, what do we do with this? Again, if there's a God, why is he allowing all this bad stuff to happen? Or I can't believe there's a God with all the junk in the world. One of the things that, as you listen to the person, I would encourage you to try to draw out of them, and maybe this is an encouragement for you, is that argument against God is actually reveals a desire and even a need for God. So the argument of all this bad stuff, all this terrible stuff, therefore there is no God, is actually points to an argument for and a need for and a desire for God. And here's why. In C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, which is a great book, just amazing. C.S. Lewis was an atheist. He was a thinker, a very, very deep thinker that had very, very intricate reasons and well thought of reasons to not believe in Christianity. And then he came to embrace Christianity, the risen Jesus Christ. And in mere Christianity, Lewis argued that with God, before his conversion, that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. So one of his biggest arguments against Christianity was the cruelty and the unjustness of the world. But then he asked himself this, and this is a quote: "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I gotten this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? Atheism turns out to be too simple. In other words, in the natural world, the strong eat the weak. That's just what happens. And there's nothing wrong with that violence. I was watching a documentary with my kids the other day about a cheetah, and we were cheering the cheetah on to get the gazelle. It got it. It ate it. And we thought, oh, that's proper and right, and that's the way the world works. Nothing was wrong with that. Where do you get the standard that says the human world? Why are we then any different? That the human world shouldn't work that way. That says the natural world is wrong. You can only judge suffering as wrong if you're using a standard higher than this world, a supernatural standard. In other words, if there is no God, you have no reason to be upset with the suffering in this world. It takes faith to get mad at this world. I hope that makes sense. So there are the argument against God, I can't believe in God with all this bad stuff, can lead to the question is, well, what makes it bad? If there is no God, it's just what happens. If there is no God, if you've taken God out of the equation, then it's just the way of the world. And yeah, you might be sorry, but that's just because some chemicals in your body that make you feel bad about it, but it has no real meaning of just or unjust. In fact, British critic and former atheist A.N. Wilson wrote about losing his faith as a young man because the intellectual society that he was around said that only stupid people believe in God and Christianity. And then he writes this: "As a matter of fact, however, it is the materialist atheism that is not merely an arid creed, but totally irrational. Material atheism says we are just a collection." This is what I was just saying. We're just a collection of chemicals and has no answer whatsoever to the question of how we should be capable of love or heroism or poetry if we are simply animated pieces of meat. So, number one, if there's a God, why is he allowing all this bad stuff to happen? We're not answering that question. We're just helping you. We're just helping the person we're talking to understand that there's a deep sense, like you would agree that there's bad stuff in the world, but where do we get that idea of just and unjust? It's just our society, what we've made up. Well, in 100 years and 500 years, if, killing 5-year-olds is the social norm, then you shouldn't feel bad about it now because we're just less enlightened now. And we would all say that's disgusting. There is some real sense of just and unjust, and that has to be something that is supreme to us. So again, it doesn't say why is there bad things, why is there a lack of justice, but it just says, hey, your tensions with this, or something I agree with, I don't agree with the conclusion. So number two is you have to help, and maybe this helps you as well, the person you're talking to understand that their argument against God in this fashion assumes a God-like knowledge and assumes that humans should have a infinite God-like knowledge. That if we human beings can't discern with a sufficient reason an act of God or an allowance of God of things, then there can't be any sufficient reason. So to say I can't believe in God because a loving God would never let this happen assumes a godlike knowledge that we as humans have an infinite understanding of how the universe works, and therefore if we can't see any reason because of our godlike knowledge, then God can't have a reason. Well, there's a problem with that. But if there's an infinite God, if God is infinite, if God is above us, if God is more knowing than us, if God is all wise, all powerful, all knowing, if he exists outside of time and sees everything, if there's an infinite God, the assumption should be that our finite mind probably won't be able to understand all his motives and plans. And so part of the thing that you can just help whoever you're talking to wrestle with, and even wrestle with yourself, is when we sit there and we go, the coronavirus, there's no good reason for this. There's no God or an unloving or unjust God. In that, there is an assumption that we have godlike knowledge that we shouldn't have, especially if we're operating under some sort of, there could be a God. We haven't even landed on there definitely is, but if there is a God, then this could have a reason that could be loving outside of us. And so this right here is where then we can talk about Jesus and the importance of him. Because, as I said, if there's an infinite God who's infinitely wise and infinitely knowledgeable and outside of time and amazing, then in fact, that infiniteness of God should split us apart so far. He should be beyond our grasp and our understanding. If we are finite creatures and he is infinite, then the distance between us and him is ununderstandable. It's just massive. And yet we have Jesus, his son, sent to embody human form, to be man, and to meet us, and to be with us, and to show us love, and to interact with us, to where we can look at Jesus, who is God, and say, this is the infinite made finite. And we can begin to interact with the reality of not this God that is beyond us in a way that is untouchable, but that is actually physically touchable and interacts with us. This is the beauty that can be drawn out of this argument. And so we don't just have to leave that sense of doubt in this theoretical range, or this theoretical place, but then we can say very tangibly that Jesus came into this space. And so then that's drawing back, and here's just a few. There's a lot more resources in order to deal with that, deal with these questions. But this then draws us back to the question is when somebody says, I can't believe because of all the unjust and all the unfairness in this world, when we listen, and when it comes down to, I can't believe in a God that just lets this world go to hell, it's just going to pieces, then hopefully, personally and lovingly, the objection that oftentimes is held is there's all this chaos in the world, all this junk in the world, all this pain, all this heartache, everything that's terrible in this world, and I just can't believe in a God that just leaves it all to go to hell and not care about it. And in that, with a listening ear and with a loving heart, you can say, well, that's not the God I believe in either. Because the God I believe in doesn't leave it all just to go to hell. He enters into this space and he takes on hell himself. He receives the wrath. He experiences the weight of all the sin, all that thing that is crushing you, that thing that draws you to doubt because the world is so unjust and so ugly. It's not just a God that looks at it and goes, yeah, it stinks for you. It's a God that came into the space of time and physicality and earth and says, I know it more than you because it was placed on me on the cross. I know how unjust the world is, and that's why I've come into this world. And so listening that objection actually draws us to the cross and draws us to a God that their objection is a God that just seems distant. Now, that doesn't answer all the questions. That doesn't mean that, oh, okay, everything's fine and we just, whistle and skip along the way. There's still deep pain and deep injustice, but it's held within the context of God that very much knows that pain and that suffering and that unjustness. So much so that the most unjust thing was that the innocent Jesus Christ died on the cross for everyone else. That's wild. That's the gospel story. And so here's how I want to end for you if you're doubting. And I want to end in an encouragement of how to move forward in dealing with those we talk to that have doubts that are centered around suffering and injustice. Remember, even that question draws to some sort of desire for God, and it carries some weight of God-like knowledge that we don't have. But here's what I want to encourage you to do. And this comes from Timothy Keller's book, Reason for God. My encouragement is to doubt your doubts, or to help them understand to doubt their doubts. If we are going to doubt God, the all supreme, all knowing, all great, if we're saying there's a possibility, but I doubt him, I doubt that there could be, then shouldn't the smaller things, the less important things, also then be doubted? So if we're going to doubt God, it's a responsible thing to doubt everything, including your doubts. And in his book, Reason for God, Tim Keller says this: it takes faith to doubt Christianity, because any worldview, including secularism or skepticism, is based on assumptions. For example, the person who says, I can only believe in something if it can be rationally or empirically proven, must realize that this itself is a statement of faith. This verification principle cannot actually be proven rationally or empirically, making it an assertion or a claim, not an argument. And here's basically what he's saying. Any worldview that you choose to have, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, whether it's atheism, whatever you choose to believe in, whether it's no faith because I just believe in science and the things of this world, carries with it actually a metaphysical faith element, something that goes above it. So you might say, I have faith, or I believe that all there is to know is that which can be measured. Let's just take, for an example, an atheistic perspective, a naturalistic atheistic perspective that says only things that can be measured, only things that can be seen, only things that are tangible. Really, that's all there is to know. And I have faith that all there is to know is things that can be measured. Therefore, if it can't be measured, it's all just in our imagination, and God is made up. Well, that is a faith statement. You can't empirically prove that the only thing to have faith in is things that are measurable. You can't measure that statement. So the statement falls in on itself. And then I would say, well, then how do you measure love? How do you measure thoughts? Yeah, you can say, here's what happens when love happens. Here's what happens chemically or emotionally. But I think you and I would know that faith or love, joy, altruism, so many things are beyond measure. And that would, I believe, invite us to say we can't just take a look at the physicality of the world. We have to say there's something else going on and reasonably doubt our doubts. And so here's some questions to doubt your doubts or help people doubt their doubts. Ask the question, why do I doubt? Like, where might that be coming from? Why do I doubt? Does my doubt have a basis? A lot of times, especially in this culture, doubt is seen as like the most noble thing we can do. It's noble to doubt and to be a skeptic. And while I think skepticism can drive us to some very healthy practices. That's not the proper understanding. If you say that this chair is blue, and I go, I think it's noble to be skeptic of that, you would say, well, that's ridiculous. There is some truth to this chair being blue. And so you've got to say, what does my doubt have a basis, or am I just interacting with this because of assumptions that I'm bringing into it? What are the alternatives to my doubt? What are the alternatives to my doubt? This has been very helpful to me. This goes back to that first question. So the first statement. The first statement was the question of why is there so much suffering? If there's a God, why is there so much suffering? Would lead then to say, well, if there's not a God, then why do I think that there's suffering? Because it hurts me? Well, that's just part of a evolutionary process of chemicals that have formed neural pathways in order for me to feel a certain way. Well, okay, that's a lot less hope-filled than, I don't understand this, but I know God does, and He's doing something through this. And so, asking that question, what are the alternatives to my doubt? Asking the question, is there evidence against my doubt? Really seeking the truth. Am I wanting my doubt to be true? That's a big one. Asking people that you talk to who have strong objections to Christianity is say, could you just explore it? You're not going to sit there and be like, I think this is what you want. It's not helpful. But to say, do you want your doubts to be true? Because a lot of times we kind of have self-fulfilling prophecies. We want them to be true, and so we go down this path. So that all leads to this. Here's kind of the last encouragement. And then next week, I hope you join me for how then do we deal with our own doubts within Christianity. But this is doubts to Christianity. Is to seek the capital T truth. Not the truth that our society has promoted that is not true at all. It's false. It's ridiculous. It's what we now hear as your own truth. What's your own truth? Just be true to your own truth. Church, friends, family, that is a slippery slope. That is not the truth that you should be seeking. You should be seeking the capital T truth. And so much so that our faith is eager for people to seek the capital T truth. It's not shy. It's not like, hey, listen, there's going to be some things, you just don't worry about it. You should just believe in Jesus. Listen to these words. Ask in Matthew 7:7. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks the door will be open. That there's an eager invitation to say, seek the truth. When you doubt, don't just sit in your doubts and say, let me build up my walls and build up my army of doubt. And so I sit here racked with all this doubt that I'm just heavy laden with. But in fact, go, okay, here's my doubt. Well, what is the truth? Let me seek the truth, not the answers that I want. What is the truth? What is the best argument? What is the best theological information? What's the best philosophical information? What's the best thing in terms of relational interaction that there's people I know and trust that have had with this God that they're claiming to love? And so it's seeking that truth, seeking the capital T truth, and looking at your doubts and saying, here's my doubts, whether it's for you or those you're talking to. And if you're talking to them, you sit with them and you discover that truth together and you walk them through and you journey with them. Don't just say, here's the truth, deal with it. Your doubts are destroyed. It's not gonna happen. But let's work on this together. Let's look for the truth. And so those are some tools. Again, we're going to have a part 2 on how do you as a Christ follower deal with your doubts. Is it sinful to have doubts? I mean, it seems pretty strong that the word says a few times, don't doubt. So how do we deal with that? Is that the full picture, or is there something more? So I hope you join me next week. But I hope that has given you some tools just to understand in this time when the world is suffering, how to handle doubt and people going, how can there be a God with all the chaos, and encouraging them to doubt their doubts and seek the truth.